For 3 centuries, the Phantom Fleet drifted in absolute silence. No engines, no transmissions, just a graveyard of warships frozen in the dark. To the galaxy, they had been dead for generations. But inside, they had merely slept. Admiral Elias Rourke awoke to the sound of alarms. A deep, pulsing red light bathed his stasis pod as oxygen hissed back into his lungs. The sudden rush of awareness was jarring, like waking from a nightmare into another. He gasped, fingers twitching as the pod's restraints disengaged. His mind felt sluggish, heavy. But instinct took over. Training, years of it, pushed aside the confusion. His boots hit the cold metal floor of the Indomitable's cryo bay. Other pods around him were already opening, the ship's officers staggering out of their forced slumber. A voice crackled over the ship-wide comms. Lieutenant Carson, his comms officer. "Admiral, you need to get to the bridge. Now." Rourke shook off the last remnants of stasis sickness and moved. The corridors of the Indomitable, his fleet's flagship, were dimly lit, emergency power running at bare minimum. It wasn't an ambush. The ship's automated systems would have woken them differently if it were. This was something else. Something no one had planned for. He reached the bridge in minutes, stepping into the command deck where a skeleton crew was already at their stations. His executive officer, Commander Renko, turned to him, jaw tight with tension. "Sir, we received a signal." Rourke's stomach clenched. A signal? After 300 years of nothing. That wasn't possible. Carson pulled up the data on the main holoscreen. The transmission was weak, distorted, barely holding together. But the ID signature was unmistakable. It was Terran. "It started pinging exactly 17 minutes ago," Carson said. "Automated. Looping." Rourke stepped forward as the distorted audio played through the bridge speakers. The voice was synthetic, likely an AI distress protocol. "This is Earth Command. Any surviving Dominion forces, respond. The homeworld is lost. Humanity is in exile. If you receive this, return. We need you." Silence followed. The weight of the words settled over the bridge like a funeral shroud. The Phantom Fleet had gone into that final battle centuries ago believing they were fighting to save humanity, to hold the line. Now, if the transmission was to be believed, there was nothing left to hold. Rourke exhaled slowly. He turned to Carson. "Source." The lieutenant hesitated. "Unknown. It's coming from Concordance space, but that doesn't make sense. The Dominion fell centuries ago. Earth should be." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. They all knew the history. Earth had been glassed by the coalition that rose to tear humanity down. The Terran Dominion's fleets were crushed. Its colonies were either wiped out or absorbed into the Galactic Concordance, a multi-species empire built on the ruins of humanity's ambition. And yet, here was a voice from the past, calling them home. Rourke clenched his fists. 100 questions burned in his mind. Was it real? A trap? Some forgotten Terran relic broadcasting into the void? It didn't matter. There was only one answer. "Set a course," he ordered. "We're going back." The Phantom Fleet moved like a specter through the void, silent and unseen. The fleet's sensor arrays, once state-of-the-art, struggled to parse the strange, shifting energy signatures of modern space. The galaxy had moved on without them, but even outdated, their warships remained monsters, hulking war machines designed in an age where humanity had no equal. Admiral Elias Rourke sat rigid in his command chair aboard the Indomitable, staring at the main holoscreen. The signal was growing clearer as they approached its origin point, a barren system on the fringes of the Galactic Concordance's territory. The deeper they pushed, the more the uneasy truth set in. The galaxy had not been waiting for them. Carson's voice broke the silence. "We're picking up new data on known star systems. Cross-referencing archives now." Rourke exhaled through his nose, steeling himself. "Tell me." Carson hesitated before pulling up the map. The Dominion's once vast empire was gone, its territory carved up among alien factions like scavengers picking at a corpse. Human colonies that once stood defiant were either erased or occupied. The Concordance's dominion stretched farther than the Dominion ever had, a coalition of species united by a singular goal: to ensure humanity never rose again. Renko folded his arms. 300 years, and they still fear us enough to keep our name buried. They don't fear us, Rourke said, voice like iron. They think we're extinct. Carson's console chirped. We've got visual on the source of the transmission. The holoscreen zoomed in on a shattered station orbiting a dead world. Its hull was scorched, pockmarked by centuries of meteor strikes. It was an ancient Terran listening post, long abandoned, left to rot in space. And yet, the signal still pulsed. This place should have been space dust by now, Renko muttered. Rourke stood. Bring us in. Silent approach. As the fleet advanced, sensor warnings blared to life. Carson's eyes widened. Admiral, we're not alone. A patrol fleet. Concordance warships, sleek and predatory, lurked just outside the station's orbit. Not in battle formation. They weren't hunting. They were watching. Rourke clenched his jaw. They know about the signal. Renko cursed under his breath. Then it's a trap. Or a warning, Rourke countered. If that transmission wasn't meant for us, why is it still broadcasting? Carson paled. Admiral, they're hailing us. Silence fell over the bridge. The Concordance believed humanity was dead. The Phantom Fleet was supposed to be a ghost story. And yet, here they were, announcing their return with a fleet of warships that belonged to a civilization that should not exist. Rourke nodded. Put them through. The holoscreen flickered, revealing an alien face, sharp, avian features, golden eyes full of suspicion. Ixilari. Rourke had fought their kind before, back in the war. The alien studied him for a long moment before speaking. This is Commander Carell of the Concordance Third Fleet. Unidentified vessels, state your purpose in Concordance space. Rourke leaned forward, voice calm. This is Admiral Elias Rourke of the Terran Dominion. He let the words settle like a hammer. We've come to answer the call. The alien's expression barely flickered, but the hesitation was enough. They weren't expecting an answer. Humanity is dead, Carell said. And if you wish to live, you will power down your ships immediately. Renko smirked. Bad news, pal. We've been dead before. The comm channel cut. The enemy ships moved. Rourke's eyes burned with cold fire. Battle stations. The first shots screamed across the void. The Phantom Fleet was done hiding. The first shots streaked across the void, brilliant lances of plasma and hyper-accelerated slugs cutting through the black. The Concordance warships fired in controlled, precise salvos. Textbook fleet doctrine. The Phantom Fleet did not answer in kind. They did not fight like the polished navies of the modern era. They fought like the demons of a war the galaxy had long tried to forget. Admiral Elias Rourke gripped the armrests of his command chair, watching the battle unfold through the main holoscreen. The Indomitable's railguns were already cycling up, preparing to return fire. Commander Renko, he said, voice calm despite the chaos, bring the fleet into knife-fighting range. Renko grinned. Aye, sir. The Phantom Fleet moved as one, shifting from a defensive formation to an all-out assault. They didn't trade volleys at long range, where the enemy's superior targeting systems would pick them apart. No, they closed the distance with terrifying speed, their warships firing up maneuvering thrusters to weave through incoming fire. The Concordance ships hesitated. They were used to fighting fleets that respected distance, that engaged in calculated exchanges. They had never fought this. The Indomitable roared to life, unleashing a brutal broadside that ripped the shields off the lead Concordance destroyer. The smaller ship twisted violently, its hull splitting apart in a series of cascading explosions. Before the wreckage had even finished disintegrating, the Phantom Fleet's smaller escort ships swarmed through the gaps, launching torpedoes in coordinated bursts. Carson shouted over the din. Enemy ships attempting to fall back, requesting reinforcements. Rourke's jaw tightened. They won't get the chance. The Indomitable surged forward, leading the charge. Another Concordance warship, this one a sleek silver frigate, tried to peel away, but a pair of Terran corvettes flanked it like starving wolves. A concentrated burst of mass driver rounds punched through its engines, and it lurched, dead in space. A heartbeat later, plasma torpedoes gutted its hull from bow to stern. The Concordance fleet was unraveling. The auxiliary commander, Carell, appeared again on the hull screen, his feathers bristling in what Rourke recognized as fear. "This is madness," Carell spat. "Your ships are outdated, your technology inferior." Rourke cut him off. "You don't understand, do you?" His voice was steel. "You're fighting the last warriors of Terra. We don't need better ships. We are the weapons." He gave a subtle nod to Carson. The lieutenant terminated the transmission. The final enemy cruiser, realizing the battle was lost, attempted to break away at full burn. It almost made it. Then a spinal railgun from the Indomitable spoke, launching a hyper-dense slug at a fraction of light speed. The Concordance ship's rear quarter imploded, the sheer kinetic energy tearing it apart in a silent, fiery bloom. And just like that, the battle was over. The bridge was silent except for the distant hum of cooling weapons. Wreckage drifted through space. Renko exhaled. "First engagement in 300 years, and we just wiped out a patrol fleet." Rourke wasn't smiling. His mind was already on the next step. They'll send more. He turned his gaze to the derelict station, still broadcasting its impossible message. "Let's find out who called us home." The derelict station loomed ahead, a jagged skeleton of metal and ice orbiting the dead world below. Its hull was ancient, scarred by centuries of neglect and meteor impacts, but the signal still pulsed, steadily, relentlessly. Someone, or something, had ensured it never stopped calling. Admiral Elias Rourke stood in the Indomitable's hangar bay as his boarding team finished gearing up. The squad was small, 10 of his best Marines, led by Lieutenant Vale. Hardened soldiers, their armor modified from the old Dominion era, looking more like wraiths than men. Rourke adjusted the seal on his own helmet. He could have sent Vale's team alone, but this was no ordinary mission. This was personal. Renko's voice crackled in his earpiece. "Admiral, we've finished sweeping the wreckage. No survivors from the Concordance fleet." A pause. "We should get moving. More will come." "They always do," Rourke muttered. "Hold position. We won't be long." Vale gave a sharp nod, and the boarding team moved out, crossing the void in zero-G shuttles. The approach was smooth, too smooth. Rourke had expected automated defenses, but the station made no move to resist them. It was as if it had been waiting. As their boots clamped onto the hull, Vale worked a manual override, forcing the airlock open with a hiss. The interior was dark, frozen, the walls coated in frost and ancient bloodstains. Their helmet lights cast long shadows down the corridors, illuminating the ghosts of the past. "Movement," one of the Marines whispered. Rourke tightened his grip on his rifle. The squad advanced cautiously, clearing each corridor in formation. The station wasn't abandoned. It was watching them. The flickering remains of Dominion tech still pulsed along the walls, running on backup power. The deeper they went, the stronger the signal became, leading them toward a central control chamber. The doors were sealed, but a single Dominion insignia was burned into the metal, a symbol that should not exist in this era. Vale glanced at Rourke. "Orders." Rourke stepped forward and pressed his palm against the panel. To his shock, it reacted immediately. Gears groaned, and the doors slid open with a sluggish mechanical hiss. Inside, the chamber was lined with darkened terminals and shattered displays. And at the center, sitting atop a throne of cables, was the impossible. A humanoid figure, motionless, its body a fusion of metal and decayed flesh. Wires ran into its skull, linking it directly into the station's systems. Its once pristine Dominion officer's uniform was barely recognizable beneath the centuries of rot. Then its eyes opened. The voice that followed was broken, a glitched echo of the past. You finally came." The Marines tensed, weapons raised. Rourke stepped forward, studying the figure. It was no ordinary human. It was a relic. A cyborg, its consciousness barely holding together. A watchman. "Who are you?" Rourke demanded. The figure's cracked lips twitched. "Earth still stands." A pause. A weak, pained chuckle. "But she is not free." Rourke's blood turned to ice. Earth was alive, and she was in chains. For the first time since emerging from the void, Rourke felt the weight of something far heavier than war. Earth was alive. Not burned, not shattered. Alive, but enslaved. The cyborg's breathing was shallow, artificial. It had been here for centuries, waiting for the Phantom Fleet to return. A final failsafe of the Dominion, bound to this dying station, keeping the signal alive for an empire that no longer existed. "Who holds Earth?" Rourke's voice was low, dangerous. The cyborg's decayed fingers twitched against the cables woven into its flesh. The Concordance. After the war, they did not glass her. That was a lie. They took her. They harvested. A cold rage spread through Rourke's chest. The Dominion had been told Earth was wiped away, annihilated to ensure humanity never rose again. Instead, they had stolen her, kept her. What had they done? What horrors had played out on his homeworld while he and his fleet had been lost in the dark? Vale spoke, voice sharp. "How do we free her?" The cyborg's mechanical eye flickered. "Orion Gate." The room went silent. Orion Gate, the largest and most heavily fortified space station in the galaxy, the central chokehold of the Concordance's military might. It was a fortress, a citadel of alien supremacy, and it was the only thing preventing the Phantom Fleet from striking at the heart of the enemy. Rourke clenched his fists. They had always been dead men walking. What difference did it make if they burned the galaxy down with them? He turned to Vale. "We're done here. Pull the data cores. We leave nothing behind." The cyborg let out something like a sigh. "They will come for you." Rourke met its gaze. "Then we'll remind them why they feared us." The cyborg smiled, if it could be called that. A last, dying ghost of the past. Then the light in its eye flickered out. The body slumped, finally free from its eternal watch. The war had begun. Hashtag. The Phantom Fleet moved like a storm through the void. They didn't wait. They didn't give the Concordance time to regroup. They struck. One by one, they raided ancient Dominion shipyards long thought abandoned. Wrecked warships, forgotten and lifeless, were reawakened. Crews scavenged alien technology, stripping Concordance vessels for anything useful. They built weapons not seen in centuries, Warborn and Vengeance Forge. The galaxy had advanced in technology, but it had grown complacent. The Phantom Fleet had not. They didn't need the newest ships. They needed weapons that could kill. And in that, humanity had never faltered. The first true battle came swift and brutal. A Concordance fleet was stationed at Graveyard 03, an old Dominion scrapyard filled with the husks of war. It was meant to be a staging ground for Concordance reinforcements. Instead, it became their tomb. The Phantom Fleet struck without warning, tearing through the enemy ships like a pack of wolves set loose on sheep. Their warships, once outdated, were now vicious hybrids of old Dominion brutality and stolen Concordance tech. The battle lasted minutes. The Concordance ships never stood a chance. From the wreckage, the Phantom Fleet emerged stronger, larger, deadlier. And now, their sights were set on Orion Gate. The Phantom Fleet had been a whisper in the dark. Now, it was a roar of defiance. Orion Gate stood at the crossroads of the galaxy, a fortress that had never fallen, a monument to the Concordance's dominance. Tens of thousands of warships had passed through its immense superstructure, ensuring that no species, least of all humanity, would ever rise to threaten the new order. Tonight, it would burn. Rourke stood on the Indomitable's bridge, eyes locked on the tactical display. Orion Gate was a beast, bristling with defenses, shielded by an armada of Concordance warships. Attacking it head-on was suicide. So they wouldn't. Final checks, Rourke said, voice calm. Carson's fingers flew across the console. All units in position. Task Force Omega reports weapons primed. Our infiltrators are inside the station, awaiting the signal. Renko smirked. You sure about this, Admiral? Taking on the biggest military installation in the galaxy with a ghost fleet. Rourke exhaled slowly. I don't need to be sure. I just need them to be afraid. He turned to Carson. Send the trigger. Hashtag, hashtag, hashtag. Inside Orion Gate, alarms blared. The infiltration team, former Dominion Black Ops soldiers now branded as outlaws, struck from the shadows. Sabotage charges detonated across critical systems, shutting down shield arrays, scrambling targeting relays, and severing communication lines. Panic spread through the Concordance fleet. Commanders screamed over fractured comms, trying to organize their forces, but the Phantom fleet was already among them. From the void, humanity's forgotten warriors surged forward. The Indomitable led the charge, its newly upgraded railguns firing in devastating bursts, tearing through the outer defense grid. Concordance warships, sleek and pristine, found themselves outmaneuvered by battle-worn relics that fought with terrifying precision. The Phantom fleet did not engage in fleet doctrine warfare. They fought dirty. They fought human. A Concordance dreadnought, its hull lined with glowing energy weapons, fired a full broadside at the Indomitable. The blast should have been fatal, but Rourke had anticipated it. Phase shift decoys. Now, 3 holographic duplicates of the Indomitable flickered into existence, warping between the dreadnought's firing solutions. Its weapons tore into empty space. The real Indomitable was already above it, railguns firing downward at point-blank range. The dreadnought's shields collapsed in an instant. Torpedoes followed, punching through armor and igniting its reactor. It went up like a dying star. Renko laughed. That's one ugly bastard off the board. Across the battlefield, the Phantom fleet waged war like only humans could, turning the enemy's own arrogance against them. Fighters darted through blind spots, heavy cruisers broke formation to strike vulnerable flanks, and AI-guided missiles turned the Concordance's own targeting networks into chaos. Then came the final blow. The infiltrators reached Orion Gate's main reactor. They didn't try to disable it. They overloaded it. A desperate Concordance transmission blared across all channels. All forces, retreat. Orion Gate is. The explosion cut them off. Fire consumed the station from the inside out, its once impenetrable walls cracking apart. A shockwave rippled through space, tearing apart Concordance ships that were too slow to escape. Orion Gate did not fall. It burned, and the Phantom fleet pressed on toward Earth. The Phantom fleet tore through Concordance space like an unstoppable storm. With Orion Gate reduced to a burning husk, the enemy's once unbreakable supply lines were in ruins. Their fleets scrambled to regroup, but the Phantom fleet did not give them time. There was only one objective left: Earth. Rourke stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, staring at the swirling blue-green marble displayed on the holoscreen. After 3 centuries, they were finally looking at their homeworld again. But it wasn't theirs anymore. Carson's voice was tense. Admiral, we've decrypted Concordance transmissions. They know we're coming. Every available fleet is converging on Earth. Renko scoffed. Good. Saves us the trouble of hunting them down. Rourke wasn't smiling. He analyzed the enemy's formation, his mind working through the brutal calculus of war. The Concordance wasn't holding Earth with a single fleet. They had turned the entire Sol system into a fortress. Dozens of orbital platforms bristled with weapons, planetary defense grids powered by alien reactors. Entire moons had been converted into shipyards to maintain the occupying forces, And stationed above the planet, like a crown of iron and fire, was the Concordance's high command, its greatest warships gathered in a defensive blockade. It was the kind of fleet that could shatter an empire, and it stood between the Phantom Fleet and home. Vale's voice came through the comms. "What's the call, Admiral?" Rourke exhaled, slow and steady. "We break them. Hashtag, hashtag, hashtag." The battle for Earth began in fire. The Phantom Fleet didn't hold back. They struck hard, overwhelming the first Concordance battle line before the enemy even had a chance to adapt. The Indomitable speared through enemy formations, its main railguns ripping through Concordance command ships like paper. Warcruisers, once thought invincible, burned in the darkness, their wreckage scattering like debris in a hurricane. But the enemy did not break. The Concordance had built this blockade for one purpose: to ensure humanity never rose again. And now that the ghosts of the Dominion had returned, they fought with ruthless desperation. Titan-class warships unleashed planetary-scale energy weapons, scorching the Phantom Fleet in burning waves of plasma and ion fire. Orbital platforms fired devastating kinetic lances that could tear apart capital ships with a single shot. Swarms of Concordance fighters overwhelmed strike groups, dragging the battle into brutal, close-quarters carnage. The fleet was outnumbered. The enemy was entrenched. Every second that passed, more Concordance reinforcements surged in from the outer system. And still, the Phantom Fleet did not stop. On the battlefield, the old laws of war meant nothing. Dominion warships, reforged with scavenged Concordance tech, hunted their enemies, fighting with a ferocity the galaxy had long forgotten. They crashed into enemy formations like wolves into a herd, breaking apart rigid Concordance tactics with unpredictable, vicious efficiency. Rourke's voice cut through the chaos. "All units, push forward. Break the blockade." The Indomitable led the charge, engines flaring as it spearheaded the assault straight toward the enemy's heart. And ahead of them, waiting in the shadow of Earth's stolen skies, was the final battle. Earth's skies were not her own. Massive Concordance warships held position in the upper atmosphere, their alien hulls casting long shadows over the world below. The once proud cradle of humanity was choked in an artificial night, its surface marred by the scars of centuries under occupation. But the sky was about to burn. The Phantom Fleet crashed into the final Concordance battle line, with all the fury of a forgotten people reclaiming their home. The blockade, once an unbreakable wall, buckled under the relentless assault. Rourke gripped the armrests of his command chair, his voice unwavering. "All ships, press the attack. No one stops until we touch soil." The Indomitable tore through the enemy ranks, railguns, and plasma torpedoes, gutting warships that had ruled unchallenged for centuries. On every front, the Phantom Fleet fought like demons, striking with brutal precision, adapting to enemy tactics faster than the Concordance could adjust. The Concordance High Command refused to surrender. Their last great dreadnought, the Z-Krail, a warship the size of a small moon, moved to block the Phantom Fleet's advance. Its weapons were the kind that could vaporize continents. It had stood unchallenged for 300 years. It lasted exactly 7 minutes. The Indomitable fired first, disabling its primary shield generators with a well-placed railgun shot. Then came the Phantom Fleet's remaining heavy warships, hammering it with torpedoes and concentrated fire. The Z-Krail retaliated, but its shots went wild. Its targeting systems, scrambled by cyber warfare teams embedded deep within the Concordance's own networks. The final blow came when the Indomitable's main gun punched straight through the dreadnought's bridge. The Z-Krail didn't just explode, it collapsed, its core detonating in a blinding, silent firestorm that shattered the last semblance of Concordance control. The blockade was broken, and the Phantom Fleet descended. The skies above Earth ignited as Drak ships plunged through the atmosphere, streaking like meteors toward the ground below. Cities once built by humanity were now alien strongholds, crawling with Concordance forces. The remnants of Earth's population, long subjugated, were corralled into labor camps, their history erased, their spirits crushed beneath centuries of servitude. No more. Rourke led the first wave himself. He stood at the ramp of his dropship, watching as the ruined skyline of what was once New York came into view. The towering spires had been replaced with concordant citadels, the streets below patrolled by machines and soldiers who believed humanity would never rise again. They were wrong. The dropship slammed into the ground. The ramp lowered, and the Phantom Fleet's warriors stepped onto Earth for the first time in 3 centuries. Gunfire erupted. The battle for Terra had begun. It did not take days. It took hours. Across the planet, from the burning ruins of London to the frozen wastes of Siberia, the people of Earth saw their lost warriors return. At first, they thought they were hallucinations, ghosts of the past, coming to take their revenge. Then they saw the bodies of their oppressors falling. Then they saw the Concordance war machines burning. And they realized the truth. Humanity had come home. The resistance ignited like wildfire. The Concordants, having believed their grip unshakable, found themselves facing something no military doctrine could account for, an entire species that had nothing left to lose and everything to reclaim. Rourke stood atop the shattered remains of the Concordance governor's palace, looking out over the city. Smoke curled into the sky. The last enemy ships were retreating, their surviving forces scrambling for any escape route they could find. The war was over. Ranko limped up beside him, blood on his armor, a grin splitting his face. We did it. Rourke exhaled, staring at the horizon. The first sunrise over a free Earth in 300 years. No, he murmured. We started it. Because the Concordance still ruled the galaxy. And now, they knew what humanity truly was. They had spent centuries burying the past, but the ghosts of Terra had returned. And they were just getting started.